There are some reports this morning that Vladimir Putin might be open to holding talks with the Ukrainian government. Can you just bring us up to speed on the latest? Is he really willing to sit down and talk about what's happening right now?
Well, certainly we saw that the markets reacted very strongly to this with the ruble rising and Russian stocks. But I would caution that it's, first of all, it's rather unclear what this offer would constitute. That it was the Russian president's spokesman, long-term spokesman, who was talking in terms of talks along the lines of Ukraine's neutral status. We're really not entirely sure what that would mean. It's also, I would say that there's no sign of the fighting ceasing on the ground from what we the reports that we're looking at. What is interesting is that there was a talk between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin earlier today, in which President Xi made the point that he supported the idea of talks, all of which suggests a positive movement, but I would be very cautious about interpreting it so far.
General Leakey, I'd love to get your take on this as well. I mean, are you cautiously optimistic, or what do you make of the current situation right now, especially because of, as Alan said, there are still reports that there is conflict on the ground?
So I think it's very important to understand that there are two dimensions to the Ukrainian situation at the moment. One is Putin's war, and the other is the Ukraine campaign. Now, you have to distinguish the end states of both of those, what Putin wants. Putin's war is not just about Ukraine. It's about creating a space around Russia, just as the USSR had during the period of the Cold War. And if you look back over 20 years, he walked into Chechnya and brought them into the Russian sphere. He walked into Georgia and annexed South Ossetia and Abkhazia. He walked into Crimea and annexed that. Now, those are all soft takes in a way. Ukrainian is a much, much bigger take and is a campaign that's really made the world sit up and take notice. And so the key question here to ask is what is Putin's end state, not in the war, but in relation to Ukraine? And the second key question, which we have to really identify, is what is the will of the people? And I don't just mean in Ukraine, I mean also in Russia. Because if Putin subordinates the will of the people, gets over the Ukrainian will to fight or to resist, then he wins. If he can't do that, he will lose. He will lose eventually. And he knows that from the Russian experience in, for example, Afghanistan, right, where they beat an ignominious withdrawal. And the outcome of the Ukraine campaign will depend on the will of the people. It will be helped by external factors in the war generally, by the attitude of the West to impose sanctions and other punitive things. It may also depend on how far Putin decides to extend the campaign into the other strands of the war he's waging, whether that goes into cyber and even space.
Yeah, General, I wanted to ask you about that because a lot of people are talking about the response from the West. And right now, what we're seeing actually from European leaders is there's no coordinated response. So if you were advising leaders at this point in time, considering what you just said, I mean, how would you advise them to prevent Putin from further extending out even further west?
I could give them all sorts of advice about some really good things to do, but that would be from a military point of view to put a very quick end to the Ukrainian expedition. But the problem is that there would be some unpredictable consequences of doing that, which might be really hard to manage and really unpalatable and more damaging to the West than even they might be to the Russians. And that is why there isn't a coordinated, cohesive response from the West, because they all see the collateral damage that could be caused by imposing, for example, catastrophic sanctions on Russia. One of the sanctions that's talked about, by the way, is excluding the Russian economy from the SWIFT banking system, the messaging system. That simply isn't going to work. It might, in the short term, create some damage on the Russian But there are two alternatives. There's a Russian alternative to SWIFT and a Chinese alternative to SWIFT. It wouldn't take more than a few weeks, maybe months, for those to develop. And why? Because the rest of the global economy is dependent on Russian raw materials and trade with Russia. Even Europe depends on that. So there will be workarounds to it. And I can sympathize with people saying there's no point in banning Russia from SWIFT because they'll find workarounds to it and it will do more damage to us.